The wheels of my Jeep crunched against the gravel as I turned into the driveway, the evening sun casting long shadows across the trees lining the perimeter of our land. After 6 months overseas with the Army Corps of Engineers, I was looking forward to the smell of home-hewn fresh air and Grandpa's Castilian chili simmering on the stove. What I wasn't expecting was an open garage door and 2 unfamiliar truck beds peeking out. I killed the engine and stepped out, instantly alert. The door wasn't wide open, just cracked enough to be unsettling. Grandpa, a retired sheriff and the kind of man who still triple-locked doors in the middle of the countryside, never left things unsecured. I approached slowly, instinctively brushing my fingers across the sidearm holstered beneath my jacket. Half a year in Kandahar had sharpened my sense of when something wasn't right, and this wasn't right. With one strong lift, I raised the door fully. 2 hulking Ford F350 trucks sat inside, parked nose to nose, their chrome grills gleaming beneath the ceiling light like teeth in a predator's snarl. My workbench was blocked, the ATV I used for land surveying pinned between them, my entire garage taken over. I circled to the rear of the nearest truck. A deco glared back at me. Greenbrier Ridge, HOA maintenance fleet. Unbelievable. I stormed through the back door into the kitchen where Grandpa stood, casually peeling apples over the sink, radio humming some old Johnny Cash tune. The house smelled of cinnamon and cedarwood, and he looked just the same as always, flannel shirt, leather belt, silver hair slicked back with discipline. "You see the garage?" I asked. He didn't even turn around. "Ah, so she parked the trucks after all." I echoed, setting my duffel on the floor. "Who gave her permission?" He placed the peeler down and wiped his hands on a towel. "Karen Holt, HOA president, came here last week with 2 clipboard commandos and a locksmith. Claimed the HOA had legal jurisdiction over community assets during seasonal renovations. Said your garage wasn't being used, so they were repurposing it." I stared at him. "You let her break into my garage?" Grandpa turned and leaned against the counter, expression unreadable. "I told her she was trespassing, showed her the deed. She waved it off and said it hadn't been processed. I wasn't going to get into a shouting match on your porch while you were still overseas. She forced entry, she commandeered it," he said dryly. "At least, that's what she called it. But don't worry. I've been around long enough to recognize the kind of woman who believes rules are just suggestions for everyone else. I figured she'd get comfortable enough to make a mistake." I narrowed my eyes. "You've got something planned?" He gave me a slow smile, the kind that made suspects sweat during interrogations back in his sheriff days. "Let's just say, the door has enhancements now." "Enhancements?" he shrugged. "A surprise. You were always better at dealing with wires and motion sensors. I've just kept it old school, locks, padlocks, and a very special alert system." I shook my head, pacing. "This isn't just about a garage, Grandpa. If she thinks she can walk onto private property and commandeer it, what's next? The barn, the well. She's using HOA policy like a badge and people are letting her. That's how tyrants operate. They count on folks being too polite, too tired to push back." I stared out the window toward the road, a narrow winding stretch framed by pine and pride. "When I bought this property 5 years ago, I signed the HOA agreement under the assumption it would keep the area clean and orderly. But within 2 years, Karen took over and turned it into a full-blown regime. Fines for unapproved mailboxes, notices for grass an inch too high, rumors of hidden cameras mounted on utility poles. Before I left for deployment, I filed a formal withdrawal request. It had been acknowledged but never finalized. Now I knew why. They think because I'm gone, they can do what they want," I muttered. Grandpa placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "They think you're alone, but you're not. And trust me, she's not as smart as she thinks." I nodded slowly, the soldier in me stirring. "I want those trucks gone." "They will be," Grandpa said, walking to the back door. "But let her come back first. Give her enough rope to hang herself." I glanced at him. "You sure she will?" he chuckled. "Women like Karen can't resist doubling down, especially when they think they've won." Outside, the wind picked up, the sky turned amber. And I knew, in that moment, the war for my garage was just the opening battle. The next morning, I showed up at the Greenbrier Ridge HOA office wearing my clean army jacket and a chip on my shoulder. The building sat nestled between a yoga studio and a chain coffee shop, glass front, pristine landscaping, and a plaque that read "Preserving Neighborhood Harmony Since 2003. Inside, it was colder than it needed to be, the walls painted in clinical beige. At the front desk sat the last person I wanted to see, Karen Holt. Karen, the self-crowned queen of conformity, wore her usual pastel blazer and weaponized smile. Her bun was so tight it looked painful, and her glasses glinted like they'd been sharpened just for intimidation. She looked up from her laptop and her eyes flicked to the patch on my jacket. "Ah, Mr. Decker," she said, voice syrupy. "Welcome home." "Spare me the welcome," I said, tossing a manila folder onto the desk. "You've got 2 trucks in my garage. That's criminal trespass." Karen opened the folder with gloved fingers, glanced at the deed, and smirked. "This still shows your property under HOA governance. The withdrawal request was never finalized. We sent multiple notices requiring updated documentation." "That's not what the clerk said when I filed it." Well, unfortunately, intend to leave doesn't equate to authorization, she replied, feigning sympathy. And since your garage wasn't being used, we exercised temporary usage rights under Emergency Provision 14B. That's not a real law, I snapped. She tapped a keyboard. It's in our supplementary amendments, Section 4.5, subsection D. I leaned closer. You broke into my property. Karen's smile tightened. Your grandfather was notified. He didn't protest because he was waiting for me. She folded her hands neatly. Look, we needed a secure location to store the trucks while we repaved the HOA maintenance lot. Your garage was ideally climate-controlled, easily accessible, and otherwise unused. We thought you'd appreciate the community spirit. This isn't community. This is control. You think because you run the HOA you own everyone's lives. Karen's face hardened. I ensure this neighborhood remains orderly. I enforce what others are too timid to. If you have an issue, bring it up at the next board meeting or wait. She feigned a look of mock concern. You no longer hold voting rights. I clenched my jaw. She was baiting me, and I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. Instead, I stepped back, voice low. You've made a mistake, a big one. Karen blinked. Is that a threat, Mr. Decker? No, I said, turning for the door. It's a promise. That afternoon, I combed through my deployment files, paperwork, and every correspondence I had with the HOA. I found the stamped withdrawal letter dated and signed, but conveniently misfiled in the HOA's public ledger. Deliberate obstruction. I printed copies and tucked them into a folder marked Exhibit A. Meanwhile, Grandpa watched from the porch, sipping sweet tea. You planning to sue? He asked. I'm planning to bring the whole house of cards down. You might not need to, he said, nodding toward the mailbox. I walked over and pulled out a thin envelope with HOA branding. Inside, a formal notice declaring that I owed $820 in backdated community vehicle storage fees for the privilege of housing the trucks. They're charging me rent for using my own garage. Grandpa snorted. Classic Karen. Push until someone pushes back. But what disturbed me most wasn't just the trucks or the trespassing, it was the number of neighbors who'd told me similar stories once word got around that I was challenging the HOA. One elderly couple said Karen fined them for a decorative bird bath. Another woman admitted she moved away in silence because of the endless inspections. This wasn't petty politics. It was a pattern. Karen had built herself an empire brick by law, by land. No one had dared challenge her authority. Until now I looked over at Grandpa. You sure your trap is ready? His eyes twinkled. Let's just say, I installed the lock myself, the kind you don't pick. And if she steps inside again, she won't be walking out without a witness. What if she brings backup? Then they'll all get a lesson in how real property rights work. I nodded slowly. We need one more thing, proof. A solid video. Let the court of public opinion weigh in. Already wired the inside. For motion, he said. With audio. I stared at him, impressed. You've been busy. I may be retired, he said, but I've got more tricks than that woman's got. Policy memos. The wind picked up, rustling the oak trees as the sun dipped low behind the hills. In the stillness, I realized something had shifted. This wasn't just about my garage anymore. It was about standing up to a system that had bullied everyone too afraid to speak, and it was almost time to set the trap. Karen always struck me as the kind of person who thrived on one-sided victories, her preferred battlefield being paperwork, policy meetings, and passive-aggressive notes taped to front doors. She wasn't used to being challenged, and definitely not by someone who could match her word for word and trap for trap. So when she returned 3 days later to inspect the vehicles, as she'd stated in a curt email, I was ready. Or rather, Grandpa was. It was just after 8 p.m. when a black Escalade rolled slowly up our driveway, its headlights off like it was on some covert mission. I watched from the darkened living room as she stepped out, high heels clicking against the stone path like gunfire. In one hand she held a clipboard, in the other a flashlight. She was alone. Bingo, Grandpa muttered, lowering the binoculars. Right on time. We'd disabled the garage keypad and rerouted the entry to a dummy panel that triggered the door to open just enough to let her in before snapping shut behind her. The rear lock, a reinforced steel padlock, would slam into place. The motion detector would flip on lights and cameras, and just for flavor, a small speaker Grandpa had wired into the wall would deliver a pre-recorded message. She approached the side panel and entered. A code she must have copied from her first visit. The door groaned and lifted halfway. She ducked under it, stepping into the dim space, heels echoing on the concrete. Then the door slammed shut behind her. Her scream was short-lived, cut off by the sudden, blinding glow of floodlights mounted in each corner of the garage. And then came Grandpa's voice, calm and unmistakably amused, crackling from the speakers. Warning, you have entered private property without consent. Your actions are being recorded. Law enforcement has been notified. Remain where you are. She shrieked again and spun around, pounding on the garage door. From the porch, I hit record on my phone. It wasn't just about catching her, it was about proving who she was when no one else was watching. Inside, she rattled the door handle, then Tried to lift the garage manually. No luck. Grandpa had installed a locking pin that held the track in place. "I have authority," she shouted. "I'm the HOA president. You can't lock me in here." Grandpa calmly dialed 911 on the landline, eyes twinkling as he did it. 911. "What's your emergency?" came the operator's voice. "Yes, ma'am," he said smoothly. "We've got a trespasser locked in our garage. She broke in after dark. Might be trying to steal property or tamper with vehicles. Security footage is active." The operator asked for our address. He gave it, and then we waited. 10 minutes later, the sheriff's cruiser pulled up, lights flashing, gravel spitting under the tires. Deputy Morales stepped out, a tall woman with the patience of a monk and the authority of a judge. She was one of Grandpa's former cadets. "She's still in there?" Morales asked, flipping on her flashlight. Loud and panicked, Grandpa replied. "We," who opened the side door to the garage, the only other entry point. Morales stepped in first, announcing herself clearly. Karen was sitting on the floor between the trucks, red-faced and visibly shaken, phone clutched in one hand as if it were a lifeline. "She locked me in," she cried. "This is entrapment, illegal detainment." "No, ma'am," Morales said coolly, holding up a copy of the property deed we'd already provided. "You broke in, that's trespassing. Plain and simple." Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. "We've got video footage, digital timestamps, and your voice on audio," Morales added. "You entered a secured building without permission, and your HOA authority doesn't extend past the sidewalk." Karen stood, trying to regain her composure. "This will reflect very poorly on you. I have board meetings, legal counsel." Morales cut her off. "And now, you have a court date." We stood on the porch and watched as Karen was placed in the back of the cruiser. No cuffs yet, but the look on her face said everything. The queen of the HOA had finally been outmaneuvered. And the best part, she'd walked right into it. As the cruiser disappeared down the road, Grandpa leaned back in his rocking chair, arms crossed behind his head. "Don't get cocky," he said. "This was just the first battle." I nodded, eyes still fixed on the driveway. "I'm not stopping here." Because Karen's downfall wasn't just justice for MIT, it was a message to everyone she'd bullied, fined, or intimidated under the banner of neighborhood standards. And I intended to make sure it echoed. Karen's arrest didn't just echo, it thundered through Greenbrier Ridge like a summer storm. By the following morning, her mugshot had made the rounds of every local Facebook group, next-door thread, and HOA gossip chain. The carefully curated, the image of Karen Holt, orderly, righteous, in control, shattered like glass under a tire. And for the first time in years, the neighborhood wasn't whispering in fear. It was laughing. Grandpa and I sat on the porch, coffee steaming in chipped mugs, watching a steady trickle of residents slow down as they passed. Some waved, a few honked. One guy yelled, "Nice catch, Sheriff," before peeling off with a grin. It wasn't just the spectacle, it was the relief. Like a pressure valve had finally been released. That afternoon, I walked into the HOA office again, this time with a flash drive and an audience. Several residents had gathered after hearing I planned to speak. Karen's desk sat empty. Her framed Neighborhood Excellence Award had already been taken down. In her place was a frazzled interim chair named Stanley Clark, a retired CPA who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "I didn't sit. I have here," I said, holding up the flash drive, "the full footage of Karen Holt trespassing on my property, complete with audio, timestamps, and the sheriff's report." Murmurs rippled through the room. "She broke into my garage, lied about my HOA status, attempted to charge me for the privilege of housing her trucks, and worse, she manipulated the system to silence residents like you." I turned slowly, meeting eyes. Every birdbath violation, every surveillance notice, every arbitrary fine, none of it was about community. It was about control. Karen built herself a kingdom, and we let her. That ends today. Stanley cleared his throat. "Mr. Decker, thank you for your statement. We're aware of Miss Holt's legal situation, and the board is reviewing her conduct in accordance with community bylaw procedures." A woman near the back stood. Mrs. Vasquez lived 2 doors down from Karen. "No more procedures," she said. "We want accountability." Applause followed, and just like that, the board caved. A special emergency vote was held. Karen was removed from her position permanently. Her 2 allies on the board resigned within days. An outside audit was launched into the HOA's finances, and early findings revealed misused funds, excessive administrative bonuses, inflated landscaping invoices, and legal consulting fees paid to firms with no public record. She hadn't just abused her power, she'd stolen with it. The HOA was overhauled within a month. I received a formal apology, a notarized exit confirmation, and full reimbursement for the illegal storage fees with interest. The trucks were towed, the garage repainted, and the locksmith Karen hired was charged as an accomplice. But the most satisfying moment, Karen, standing beside her lawyer at the county courthouse, red-eyed and wordless as the judge ruled her actions unlawful and fined her personally for damages. No jail time, first offense, but a permanent record and a public humiliation she'd never erase. I passed her on the way out of the courthouse. She didn't look at me, but I stopped anyway. "You know," I said quietly, "you could have just asked for help. I've built airfields overseas with nothing but sweat and sandbags. I would have loaned you the garage for a good cause, but you came in like a tyrant. She didn't answer, but her silence said more than any speech ever could. Back at the ranch, life returned to a calm rhythm. The garage was mine again. Grandpa fixed up the ATV, reinforced the back gate, and started work on a new chicken coop just because. The neighbors grew closer, potlucks returned, people waved again. The fear that once hovered like fog had lifted one evening as the sun dipped below the ridge. Grandpa leaned on the porch railing and said, "Feels different now." "It is," I replied. "She ruled by fear. We took that back." He nodded. "Proud of you, son. You didn't just stand up for yourself. You stood up for the whole damn street." I smiled. "Guess the army taught me something after all." He chuckled. "Didn't teach you how to build a motion-activated lockbox with a speaker though. That's all me." We both laughed as stars began to blink through the fading sky. I knew this wasn't the end. HOA bullies, power-hungry neighbors, always find a way to push boundaries. But now Greenbrier Ridge knew how to push back, and if anyone ever forgot, they just had to remember the time Grandpa locked Karen in the garage and called the cops.